I needed $15,000 to save my daughter's life. I called my husband begging for the money. Instead of comforting me, he laughed over the sound of clinking champagne glasses and said, "We just closed on a Malibu beach house. Figure it out yourself." Before I could even process his words, my mother-in-law snatched the phone. "Stop calling my son," she sneered. "Go ask the army for a handout." Then she hung up on me. That evening, my father-in-law slipped an envelope into my hand, warning me to look at the deed, not the bank. 2 days later, my husband was pounding on my front door, realizing I had taken everything. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. My name is Olivia, 33 years old, and my life shattered on a Tuesday night to the rhythmic, terrifying beep of a heart monitor. I stood outside the pediatric intensive care unit staring through the glass at my 7-year-old daughter, Lily. Her tiny body was connected to a maze of tubes and wires. She had been born with a rare congenital heart defect, and we had always known this day might come. Her heart was failing. The temporary solutions were no longer working, and she needed an emergency pacemaker surgery scheduled for the very next morning. A throat cleared beside me. I turned to face the hospital billing administrator, a woman holding a clipboard with an expression of practiced sympathy. She explained that the specific pediatric cardiologist available for this emergency procedure was out of network for our insurance plan. The hospital required a $15,000 upfront payment for the copay and deductible before they could proceed at dawn. It was a massive sum to demand overnight, but Lily's life hung in the balance. There was no time to negotiate with insurance companies or file appeals. I nodded, my hands shaking, and told her I would transfer the funds immediately to secure the operating room. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed my husband, Bradley. He was 35, the managing director of a high-profile real estate brokerage, and he had been away on what he claimed was a crucial business trip in California for the past week. I had been leaving him voicemails all afternoon as Lily's condition deteriorated, but he had not answered a single one. The phone rang 4 times before he finally picked up. "Bradley, I need you," I said, my voice tight with panic. "Lily is in the ICU. She needs emergency surgery tomorrow morning, and the hospital needs a $15,000 copay authorized right now." Instead of the panic or concern any normal father would show, the background noise on his end told a completely different story. I heard loud music, laughter, and the distinct sound of champagne glasses clinking together in celebration. "Olivia, you are always so dramatic," Bradley slurred, his voice carrying the careless weight of expensive alcohol. "I am in the middle of a massive celebration here. We just closed on the Malibu beach house. It is stunning. You need to figure this hospital thing out yourself." I stood frozen in the sterile hospital corridor, the fluorescent lights suddenly feeling blindingly bright. A beach house. While our daughter was fighting for her next breath, my husband was throwing a party for a luxury real estate purchase I knew nothing about. "Bradley, this is not a joke," I pleaded, trying to keep my voice from cracking. "Lily's heart is failing. We need that money transferred tonight or they will cancel the surgery." There was a rustling sound over the line, and then a new voice cut through the background noise. It was Patricia, my 60-year-old mother-in-law. "Stop ruining my son's night with your hysterical demands," Patricia sneered into the receiver. Patricia had always hated me. Coming from a wealthy, established family, she viewed my working-class roots as a stain on her family's pristine image. When Bradley and I first started dating, I was a 24-year-old financial analyst serving in the United States Army. While I was proud of my 4 years of service, Patricia treated my military background like a dirty secret. She constantly made passive-aggressive comments at family dinners, implying I only married her son to escape poverty and secure a comfortable upper-class lifestyle. "Patricia, please," I begged, pushing my pride aside for the sake of my daughter. "The hospital needs $15,000 by morning. It is a matter of life or death." She let out a dry, mocking laugh. "If you are so desperate, go ask the army for a handout. You people are always looking for a free ride. Do not call this number again. The line went dead. I lowered the phone from my ear, staring at the darkened screen. I did not cry. Crying was a luxury I could not afford, and my military training had taught me to process panic into immediate calculated action. If Bradley and his mother were going to abandon us in our darkest hour, I would simply pay the hospital bill myself using our joint emergency fund. We had built that account together over the past 6 years specifically for disasters like this. It held over $120,000. I opened my banking app, typed in my password, and waited for the dashboard to load. I navigated to the Joint Savings tab, fully prepared to initiate an instant wire transfer to the hospital's billing department. The screen refreshed. I blinked, rubbing my tired eyes, assuming the hospital's poor cellular reception was causing a system glitch. I refreshed the page a second time, but the numbers staring back at me did not change. The account was completely empty. The $120,000 balance had been completely wiped out, leaving a devastating, undeniable zero. The digital zero on my screen burned into my retinas. I needed a moment to process the sheer audacity of what Bradley had just done. My mouth tasted like copper. I walked down the sterile hospital hallway toward the cafeteria, operating on pure adrenaline and military focus. I grabbed a black coffee and handed the cashier my primary debit card. The card reader beeped a sharp grating sound of absolute rejection. Declined. I handed her my secondary credit card. Declined. Every single piece of plastic tied to the joint financial life I had built with my husband was completely blocked. The cashier gave me a look of practiced pity, a look I despised more than anything. I left the coffee on the plastic counter and marched directly back to the pediatric intensive care waiting area. I dropped into a stiff vinyl chair and pulled my work laptop from my heavy leather tote bag. As a senior forensic accountant for a top-tier corporate firm, dismantling hidden financial networks was my daily specialty. I spent my days hunting down embezzled funds for massive corporations and testifying against white-collar criminals. Bradley was a flashy real estate broker with a massive god complex, not a sophisticated criminal mastermind. He had severely underestimated the exact professional skill set he used to brag about to his wealthy friends at country club dinners. I opened my encrypted financial dashboard. Bradley had predictably attempted to lock me out of our primary banking portal by changing the master password, a crude and frankly insulting maneuver that showed his staggering arrogance. He used a predictable variation of his own birth year and the name of his favorite sports team. It took me less than 40 seconds to bypass his amateur security protocols using the administrative backdoor access I had quietly established years ago when I first set up our joint home network. The moment I gained entry to the raw transaction logs, the true scope of his betrayal unfolded across my screen in stark, indisputable lines of data. The $120,000 had not just been hastily transferred to a different personal checking account. It had been systematically drained over the course of 72 hours in highly specific strategic increments designed specifically to avoid triggering the bank automatically generated fraud alerts. My fingers flew across the illuminated keyboard as I began pulling up the destination routing numbers. A bitter memory surged to the surface as I stared hard at the outgoing transaction dates. Just last Thursday, I had begged Bradley for $300 to buy a specialized medical-grade air purifier for Lily's bedroom. Her pediatric cardiologist had strictly insisted she needed perfectly clean air to prevent any minor respiratory infections before her high-risk surgery. Bradley had sighed loudly, pinching the bridge of his nose in performative exhaustion while leaning against our granite kitchen island. He looked me dead in the eye and told me we were facing temporary liquidity issues, and that my rigid army mindset made me too obsessive about medical protocols. He told me to stop being a hysterical mother and just open a window to let fresh air in. While he was standing in our kitchen lying to my face about a $300 medical necessity for his dying daughter, he was actively authorizing the final bulk transfer of our entire life savings. I ran the destination routing number through a specialized federal database access tool I kept exclusively for emergency corporate audits. The money had deliberately crossed state lines to complicate jurisdiction, It was executed as an irrevocable federal wire transfer, bouncing quickly through a regional clearing bank before landing permanently in a newly formed corporate account. The account was registered in Delaware, a state notoriously famous for its strict corporate secrecy laws that protect hidden owners. The receiving entity was not registered to a person. It was a blind, limited liability company. I ran a reverse search on the corporate registration code. The company was named Ocean Breeze LLC. The formation date was exactly 5 days ago. Bradley and his mother had meticulously planned this financial ambush while I was busy sleeping in uncomfortable hospital chairs, holding my daughter's hand. They knew the surgery date was approaching, and they intentionally timed the wire transfers so the money would clear right as the hospital demanded the massive copay. They wanted me destitute, desperate, and completely unable to fight back when they initiated whatever phase 2 of their plan was. My military training kicked in, pushing the panic down into a tight, hard box in my chest. I opened a new terminal window and initiated a deep web trace on the Delaware registered agent who filed the Ocean Breeze LLC paperwork. Determined to find the exact signature on the formation documents, I needed to know exactly who was legally holding the money that was supposed to keep Lily alive. The hospital waiting room around me faded into white noise as I typed furious strings of commands to bypass the public registry paywalls. The screen loaded a scanned PDF of the original Articles of Incorporation. I zoomed in on the authorized representative's signature line at the very bottom of the document. My breath hitched in my throat as the ink materialized on the high-resolution display. Before I could analyze the document further, a sudden shadow fell directly over my laptop screen, blocking the harsh overhead hospital lights. I immediately snapped the laptop shut, my heart hammering against my ribs, ready to confront a hospital security guard or a billing administrator coming to collect the overdue funds. I whipped my head around my military defensive posture, instantly engaging. Standing right behind my chair, silhouetted against the bright hallway lights, was a figure I completely did not expect to see in a million years. It was actually Thomas, my supposedly spineless, perpetually quiet father-in-law, looking terrified as he nervously glanced over his own shoulder to ensure he had not been followed. He stood frozen in the harsh fluorescent glare of the hospital corridor. His immaculate posture was gone, replaced by a terrified cringe. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his sweater. His eyes darted frantically up the hallway, expecting Patricia to materialize from the sterile walls. I stood up slowly, shutting my laptop and sliding it back into my tote bag. For a brief second, I thought he had come to pay the hospital bill. I thought paternal instinct had overridden his submission to his wife. I opened my mouth to demand the money, but Thomas aggressively shook his head, raising a trembling hand to silence me. He stepped closer until I could smell stale gin on his breath. He refused to sit. He nervously checked his watch, looking toward the elevators. He pulled a thick manila envelope from his coat. The paper was crumpled as if gripped tightly for hours. He shoved it into my chest. "Take this, Olivia," he whispered, his voice cracking with panic. "Put it in your bag right now before someone sees us." I held the envelope, feeling the heavy, dense stack of thick papers inside. "Thomas, what is this?" I asked, keeping my voice low and extremely firm. "Bradley just drained our entire life savings. He just took $120,000 and bought a Malibu beach house through a shell company while my daughter waits for a surgery we cannot afford. I absolutely do not need mystery envelopes. I need the copay money now." Thomas grabbed my arm, digging into my skin with surprising strength. "Forget the copay," he hissed. "The money is gone, Olivia. Bradley is not coming back to pay it. Listen to me. I only have about 2 minutes before Patricia realizes I left the hotel room. If she catches me here, she will absolutely destroy both of us." I pulled away, staring at this man, who spent a decade nodding silently while his wife mocked my military service. "What are you talking about, Thomas?" I demanded. He swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. "They are going to serve you with divorce papers," he rushed out. The paperwork is already sitting at the attorney office in Boston. They are just waiting for the perfect moment to strike. My mind struggled to process the escalation. Divorce? Bradley had never mentioned divorce. We fought over money, but he always swore we were a team. Why now, I asked. Why blindside me while Lily is in the intensive care unit? Because they need you to look completely unstable and financially destitute, Thomas explained. They are waiting for Lily to survive the surgery and stabilize. The moment doctors declare her healthy, Bradley is going to file for emergency full custody. He will claim your military background left you with mental health issues and that you are financially incapable of providing a home for a sick child. He will use your empty bank account against you, ignoring he emptied it. The calculated evil of the plan hit me like a physical blow. They wanted to take my daughter. They wanted to strip me of my child and leave me with nothing. But why, I asked, the betrayal burning in my throat. Bradley barely pays attention to Lily. He complains about her medical costs. Why fight for custody when he does not want to be a father? It is not about love, Thomas whispered, looking around frantically as an elevator bell chimed. He waited until a nurse passed before leaning closer. It is about the trust fund. I stared at him in confusion. What trust fund, I asked. We do not have a trust fund. You do not, Thomas corrected. But Lily does. Her father set up a generational wealth trust 30 years ago. He stipulated his first great-grandchild would inherit a massive financial portfolio, but the funds remain locked until that child survives their primary pediatric medical milestones. The heart surgery tomorrow is the final medical clearance required to activate the trust. The moment she wakes up with a healthy working pacemaker, a trust fund worth over $4 million instantly unlocks. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with sickening clarity. Bradley did not care about her health. He and Patricia only cared about the $4 million. If Bradley had full custody, he would automatically become the legal financial guardian of that money until Lily turned 21. He could use those millions to cover up his failing real estate deals while pretending to be a devoted father. My blood ran ice cold. I looked down at the thick envelope, suddenly realizing the magnitude of the ammunition Thomas had just handed me. "What is in here?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Everything Thomas said, backing away toward the exit. Every lie, every hidden transaction, every piece of paper they thought they destroyed. I collected it for months because I knew Patricia would eventually go too far. I cannot protect you in court, Olivia. I am too weak and Patricia would ruin me. But I can give you the weapon to fight back. The sound of the stairwell door opening echoed loudly down the corridor. Thomas jumped, visibly terrified. He took a step backward, his eyes wide with genuine fear. "I have to go," he stammered, turning toward the exit. "Wait," I called out. "How do I stop the Malibu house purchase?" Thomas paused, pushing the door open. He looked back at me, his expression a mix of regret and urgent warning. "Do not look at the bank," he whispered fiercely. "Look at the deed." I tore the thick manila envelope open, my fingers scraping against the rough paper edge. A heavy stack of stapled legal documents slid out, landing directly on my laptop keyboard with a dull thud. The header of the very first page leaped out at me in bold black ink. State of Delaware Division of Corporations, Articles of Organization. I rapidly scanned the dense paragraphs of legal jargon, my eyes hunting for the critical data points I tracked every single day in my corporate fraud investigations. The registered entity name was Ocean Breeze LLC. The official filing date matched exactly with the day Bradley had supposedly left for his crucial real estate conference in California. The initial capital contribution listed on page 2 was exactly $120,000. The exact amount drained from our emergency savings account. I flipped to the third page, searching for the managing member details. My breath hitched, lodging painfully in my throat. I stared at the bottom of the page, blinking hard, hoping the harsh fluorescent hospital lights were playing tricks on my tired eyes. There, sitting proudly on the primary authorization line, was my name, Olivia Wilson. Next to it was my full Social Security number, printed clearly for the federal government to process. below the printed text was a signature. It was my signature. The loops and angles were a near-perfect match, practiced and executed with terrifying precision. Bradley had not just drained the account we built to save our daughter. He had committed outright identity theft. Why would he use my name? Bradley had an ego the size of a skyscraper. He always insisted on his name being first on every lease, every car title, every piece of mail. He loved the appearance of absolute control. I pulled up my financial dashboard again, opening a new tab to access the deep archives of our joint banking history. I bypassed the current ledger and dug into the archived statements from 2 years ago, specifically pulling the credit reports Bradley thought he had permanently scrubbed from our home server. The ugly truth materialized in rows of denied credit applications and exorbitant high-interest penalty fees. Bradley had absolutely no credit. His personal financial score was completely decimated. I aggressively cross-referenced the dates of his massive hidden cash withdrawals from his personal checking account with his alleged weekend golf trips to Nevada and Atlantic City. The dark pattern was entirely undeniable. Thousands of dollars hemorrhaged at casino ATMs in the middle of the night, followed closely by desperate high-interest personal loans taken out to cover his tracks and maintain his wealthy facade. He had secretly gambled away his own liquidity over the past 18 months, rendering him entirely incapable of securing a standard mortgage for a luxury property. He needed pristine credit to pull off this Malibu purchase. He needed my flawless credit score. He needed my identity. I shoved the LLC formation papers aside, my hands shaking with a dangerous mixture of rage and terror. There was a second packet of documents buried at the bottom of the envelope. The header read, "Promissory Note and Security Agreement." I read the first paragraph, and the sterile hospital hallway seemed to tilt violently beneath my feet. This was not just a simple cash purchase. The $120,000 from our emergency fund was only the down payment. Bradley and his mother had taken out a $400,000 second mortgage to finance the rest of the beach house. But they did not use the Malibu property as collateral. I stared at the property address listed on the security agreement. It was my address. The home I had meticulously saved for the home where I brought Lily back from the hospital after she was born, the home that was legally in both our names. Bradley had leveraged our primary residence to secure the remaining $400,000. He had forged my signature on a massive federal loan document. In the eyes of the law, I was the sole managing member of Ocean Breeze LLC, and I had authorized a massive second mortgage on my own house to buy a luxury property. If Bradley defaulted on this loan, the bank would not just take the Malibu house. They would seize my home. They would throw Lily and me out onto the street. Worse, the moment the bank realized the signatures were forged and the funds were moved through a blind LLC, the federal government would immediately get involved. As the sole registered owner of this fraudulent entity, I would be the primary suspect investigated by federal authorities. Bradley was not just setting me up for a messy divorce and custody battle. He was framing me for federal wire fraud and massive mortgage fraud. If this blew up in my face, I would not just lose custody of my daughter. I would go straight to federal prison. The sheer calculating evil of his master plan paralyzed my lungs. Patricia and Bradley had orchestrated a flawless, devastating trap. They took my hard-earned money, stole my identity, leveraged my home behind my back, and positioned me to take the absolute fall for a federal crime. All while my sweet 7-year-old daughter lay dying in a hospital bed waiting for a life-saving heart surgery we could no longer afford. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the hard edge of the plastic waiting room table until my knuckles turned completely white. My entire life, my family, and my future had been brutally hijacked by the very man who once swore to protect us. The heavy silence of the isolated hospital corridor was suddenly shattered by a sharp, vibrating ringtone. I quickly opened my tired eyes. My cell phone was lighting up on the table right next to the fraudulent loan documents. The caller identification flashed brightly against the dark glass screen. It was an unexpected incoming video FaceTime call from my husband, Bradley. I swiped the glowing green icon to accept the incoming video call. Bradley immediately filled the high-definition screen bathed in the spectacular golden hour sunlight of the Southern California coast. He was standing casually on a sprawling glass-enclosed balcony, gripping a crystal flute of expensive champagne. The rhythmic sound of crashing waves played softly in the background, serving as a sickening contrast to the terrifying mechanical beeps of the pediatric intensive care unit, echoing just down the sterile hospital hallway. His designer linen shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his hair perfectly tousled by the ocean breeze, portraying the exact image of carefree luxury. "Olivia, you seriously need to calm down and stop calling," he slurred, taking a slow, arrogant sip of his bubbling drink. "You are completely ruining the closing celebration with your constant ringing." The hospital always exaggerates these pediatric timelines just to guarantee their operating rooms stay booked and their billing departments stay busy. "Lily is perfectly fine. You are just being completely hysterical as usual. Your rigid military mindset always makes you overreact to minor medical updates. We can easily handle the hospital copay on Monday morning when the major banks finally reopen." I stared at the man I had married 6 years ago, feeling absolutely nothing but freezing calculated precision. The panic that had gripped my chest just an hour ago had completely vanished, replaced by an icy, overwhelming focus. "Monday morning is entirely too late," I said, keeping my voice dead and completely void of the frantic emotion he clearly expected to hear. "But we are not talking about a simple hospital copay anymore, Bradley. We are talking about Ocean Breeze LLC. The crystal champagne flute stopped halfway to his mouth. The lazy, arrogant smile instantly vanished from his tanned face, replaced immediately by a rigid, terrified mask. He blinked rapidly, the alcohol temporarily chased away by a massive surge of sheer adrenaline. "I have the official corporate formation documents sitting right in front of me." I continued leaning closer to the phone camera so he could see the cold determination burning in my eyes. "I know everything about the $120,000 you quietly drained from our joint emergency savings account. I also know all about the $400,000 second mortgage you took out on our primary residence. You deliberately used my social security number to completely bypass the standard financial credit check because your massive hidden gambling debts absolutely destroyed your personal financial standing. I meticulously cross-referenced the massive cash withdrawals from those secret casino trips you took last autumn with your completely ruined bank statements. I know your credit is completely obliterated. You explicitly forged my legal signature on highly regulated federal lending documents to purchase your luxury beach house, Bradley. You fully leveraged our family home and committed felony identity theft, while our 7-year-old daughter, Hart, is actively failing inside this hospital." He stared directly at the screen, his mouth opening and closing repeatedly like a suffocating fish pulled from the water. He glanced frantically over his right shoulder, terrifiedly checking if anyone at his little beachside celebration had accidentally overheard my specific accusations. He looked back at the camera, a volatile mixture of pure, unadulterated hatred and rising panic flashing brightly in his bloodshot eyes. He did not offer a single excuse. He did not offer an apology. His thumb simply jabbed downward at the red button on the screen, and the video call abruptly disconnected, leaving me staring silently at my own grim reflection in the darkened glass. I did not waste a single second contemplating his cowardly retreat. I slammed the cellular phone down onto the rigid plastic waiting room table and rapidly pulled my heavy work laptop back open. If he had successfully secured the secondary mortgage through our primary lending institution, I could easily use my joint account authority to freeze the final disbursement of those specific funds. I immediately navigated to our secure mortgage servicer online portal, my fingers flying across the mechanical keys with frantic, deeply ingrained muscle memory. I typed in my administrative credentials, completely ready to trigger a massive federal fraud alert that would instantly lock the entire financial portfolio and prevent the final wire transfer from officially clearing the system. I aggressively hit the enter key. The screen froze for a fraction of a second. A massive glowing red banner violently splashed across the digital dashboard. Access denied. Primary account holder authority required. I stared at the crimson warning, my stomach violently bottoming out. I quickly attempted to engage the secondary administrative override I had installed years ago. Access denied. I rapidly tried the tertiary recovery security questions. Password changed. Bradley had not just crudely forged my legal signature on a stack of federal papers. He and his mother had fundamentally rewritten our entire digital financial architecture from the ground up. He had weaponized his status as a joint account holder to completely revoke my digital access, effectively locking me out of my own mortgage, my own house, and my own financial identity. I was completely trapped, suddenly left holding the bag for $500,000 in fraudulent corporate debt, facing imminent federal prison time for wire fraud, and stripped of my professional ability to freeze the stolen assets. The laptop cooling fan whirred loudly into the stifling silence of the hospital corridor. I had severely underestimated the staggering depths of his calculated betrayal. My military background prepared me for enemies on a physical battlefield, but not for a domestic ambush executed with chilling precision. Just as I reached forward to grab my phone and dial the federal fraud hotline directly, the screen suddenly lit up with another incoming call. I stared silently at the glowing caller identification on the glass. It was certainly not Bradley calling back to apologize. It was not the billing administrator demanding the overdue surgical copay. The bright digital screen unmistakably read, Kendra Real Estate Law. I stared right at the glowing glass screen before swiping the green icon to accept the call. I brought the phone to my ear, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm. Kendra was the last person I expected to hear from. At 31 years old, she was a brilliant, fierce attorney and the wife of Bradley's younger brother, Jason. We existed in the same uncomfortable orbit at suffocating family holidays, two capable women navigating the treacherous waters of the Wilson family dynamic. I held my breath, waiting for her to speak, half expecting a new twisted message from Patricia. Instead, the line crackled with the distinct sound of heavy paper being shuffled across a polished wooden desk. Olivia. I am sitting in my office right now reviewing the final escrow documents for a piece of Malibu real estate, Kendra said. Her voice was smooth, completely professional, yet laced with calculated tension. I remained entirely silent in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the hospital corridor, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles ached. Kendra did not wait for a response. Bradley and Patricia thought they were being incredibly clever. She continued the rustling of papers, amplifying over the speaker. They deliberately routed this transaction through my firm, assuming I would blindly rubber stamp the closing paperwork because I am married to Jason. They assumed family loyalty would override my legal obligations. They assumed completely wrong. I exhaled a shaky breath, pressing my back against the cinder block wall. Kendra and I had never openly discussed our mutual disdain for Patricia, but we shared a profound, silent understanding of her toxic cruelty. Patricia had relentlessly tormented Kendra from the moment Jason introduced her. She constantly subjected Kendra to vile, subtle racial microaggressions disguised as polite aristocratic curiosity. I clearly remembered a Thanksgiving dinner where Patricia loudly asked Kendra if her natural hair was an act of political defiance before intentionally seating her away from the important guests. Kendra handled the blatant disrespect with flawless grace, maintaining her fierce dignity, while dissecting Patricia's ignorance with razor-sharp legal metaphors. We were both outsiders who completely refused to break, and Patricia absolutely hated us for it. Now Kendra was holding the exact legal documents that detailed my total financial ruin. Jason is entirely oblivious. Kendra stated, her tone dropping into a conspiratorial register. He is currently at his country club playing golf, completely unaware that his brother and mother are actively trying to destroy your life. I have spent the last 45 minutes tracing the origin of the funds they are using for this down payment. I see the $400,000 secondary mortgage attached directly to your primary residence. I see your signature on the authorization lines. And Olivia, I know you well enough to know you would never legally leverage your own home without telling anyone, especially not while your daughter is fighting for her life in intensive care. They forged my signature, I said, my voice barely a harsh whisper in the empty hallway. Bradley completely locked me out of all our banking portals, so I could not freeze the accounts. He stole my identity because his own credit is completely destroyed by hidden gambling debts. I am trapped, Kendra. The hospital needs a massive copay by tomorrow morning for Lily to get her pacemaker surgery, and Bradley drained our emergency savings to fund this fraudulent corporate shell company. He left us with absolutely nothing. Kendra let out a slow, sharp breath over the line. I know he did, she replied, her voice turning to pure ice. But his forgery on your secondary mortgage is not even the most catastrophic mistake he made today. What do you mean? I asked. Bradley is arrogant, but he is also incredibly reckless, Kendra explained, her words cutting through the air with surgical precision. The secondary mortgage on your house only covered $400,000 of the transaction. The Malibu property closing costs and the remaining purchase balance required a massive injection of immediate liquid cash. I am currently looking at the routing numbers for the primary wire transfers. Bradley did not just drain your personal emergency savings account. He accessed the corporate accounts at his real estate brokerage. He took massive sums of money directly from his own clients. He is actively using restricted client escrow funds to illegally cover the remaining balance of his luxury beach house purchase. He is commingling protected corporate assets with his fraudulent personal shell company. My mind reeled as the sheer magnitude of his crime registered. Commingling client escrow funds was not just a fireable offense. It was an immediate career-ending felony that carried mandatory federal prison sentences. He had crossed a line that no financial professional could ever return from. He had stolen from his own clients to fund his lifestyle. And Kendra was sitting right in the middle of the transaction. As the primary closing attorney on this real estate deal, Kendra held absolute, unchecked power over the entire process. She possessed the legal authority to instantly freeze the escrow accounts, block the transfer of the fraudulent deeds, and immediately report the federal financial violations to the banking authorities. She held the detonator to Bradley's world. A heavy silence settled between us. I waited, my breathing completely suspended, listening to the rhythmic, mechanical hum of the hospital ventilation system above me. I could hear Kendra shifting slightly in her leather office chair on the other end of the secure connection. The ambient noise of the intensive care unit faded into the background as the reality of our shared position took hold. She paused for several agonizing seconds, allowing the catastrophic, destructive reality of her discovery to fully saturate the heavy space between us. We both knew exactly what had to be done next. There was no turning back from this precipice. Olivia, Kendra finally asked, her voice dropping to a smooth, lethal whisper. Are you ready to burn their empire to the ground? I am ready, I said, my voice dropping to a low, feral register that I hardly recognized. Burn it down. Kendra let out a decisive exhale. We need absolute security, she instructed. I am texting you an encrypted link. Download the application. Do not use the hospital network. Tether your laptop directly to your cellular data. We have exactly 12 hours before the Malibu seller demands the final release of funds. If those escrow accounts are not frozen by dawn, Bradley completes the transaction. The stolen client money vanishes, and you are left holding the secondary mortgage on your house. The federal authorities will flag the discrepancies, and your name is the only one listed on the LLC. I am downloading the application, I replied, my fingers moving across the keyboard with frantic precision. I am switching to my cellular hotspot. The secure connection engaged with a muted digital chime. A dark chat interface materialized on my screen, replacing the video window. Kendra had already uploaded a compressed zip file containing the entire closing packet, including the digital wire transfer receipts, the preliminary settlement statements, and the escrow ledger. I tore into the encrypted data, my eyes scanning the dense columns of routing numbers. My professional background as a corporate fraud investigator took total control, silencing the overwhelming terror threatening to paralyze my mind. I was no longer a terrified mother. I was a digital predator hunting a sloppy thief. I opened a specialized forensic accounting software I routinely utilized for deep financial audits. I began mapping the exact digital route of the embezzled client funds Bradley had moved. He had been remarkably brazen, assuming his family connections would completely insulate him from scrutiny. I tracked the first wire transfer. It originated from a restricted corporate holding account meant exclusively for his clients' earnest money deposits. He had sliced out $50,000, bouncing it through two separate offshore holding companies before funneling it directly into the newly minted Ocean Breeze LLC checking account. I aggressively pulled the metadata from the transaction, securing the exact timestamps, authorizing IP addresses, and specific digital signatures. He used his personal laptop for the primary transfer. I typed into the encrypted chat window, my heart pounding. The IP address perfectly matches our home network from last Tuesday. He did not even bother to use a virtual private network. He is an arrogant fool, Kendra typed back instantly. He genuinely believed no one would ever look past the initial LLC formation documents. I am staring at the final release authorization. The seller agent is pushing for the final wire clearance. Stall them. I typed back, downloading the next batch of transfer receipts. I need time to compile this into an irrefutable federal dossier. I need every single transaction documented, verified, and completely secured before we drop this bomb on the banking authorities. I am already on it, Kendra replied. I just flagged a massive series of clerical errors in the preliminary title report. I officially rejected the seller disclosure forms due to mismatched signature dates. I requested a completely new secondary verification of the property boundary lines. It is standard legal maneuvering, but it will infuriate the seller. I am buying you exactly 12 hours. They cannot legally force me to release the escrow funds until I am satisfied with the documentation. I smiled grimly at the screen. Kendra was weaponizing the tedious bureaucratic machinery of real estate law to build a massive roadblock right in the middle of Bradley's escape plan. I dove back into the digital ledger, aggressively tracing the remaining $350,000. He had pulled funds from 4 different client accounts, meticulously shaving off amounts he likely assumed would go unnoticed until the end of the fiscal quarter. I systematically isolated every fraudulent transfer, taking continuous screenshots of the originating accounts and highlighting the specific legal violations. I opened a secure master document, officially titling it the Ocean Breeze Fraud Dossier. I began dragging and dropping the meticulously gathered evidence into the file. I laid out the initial secondary mortgage fraud on our primary residence, attaching the forged signature comparisons and the metadata proving Bradley's location during the transaction. Then I built the devastating case regarding the embezzled client escrow funds. I cross-referenced the stolen amounts with the exact closing costs required for the Malibu property, creating an undeniable financial circle. When the federal authorities saw this file, Bradley would face decades in federal prison. The dossier is nearly complete. I updated Kendra through the encrypted channel, my fingers aching from the relentless typing. I have a rock-solid paper trail proving massive wire fraud, felony identity theft, and severe escrow embezzlement. It is a masterpiece of criminal stupidity. Keep compiling, Kendra instructed. I am getting aggressive pushback from Patricia now. She is texting me directly demanding to know why the closing is delayed. She is completely panicked. I am ignoring her completely. The sudden sharp click of heavy heels echoing loudly down the empty linoleum hospital corridor violently broke my intense concentration. I snapped my laptop completely shut, my heart instantly leaping into my throat in panic. The heavy, intimidating footsteps stopped directly in front of my chair. I slowly looked up, my eyes meeting the stern, unsympathetic face of the hospital billing administrator. She clutched a thick yellow clipboard against her chest, her expression entirely devoid of compassion. "Mrs. Wilson," she said, her cold voice echoing loudly in the sterile, silent waiting area. "We have a severe administrative crisis regarding your daughter Lily right now." The primary insurance provider just officially denied the critical surgical pre-authorization due to a catastrophic lapse in your monthly premium payments. We require an immediate out-of-pocket cash deposit of $15,000 to proceed with the pacemaker installation. If those funds do not officially clear our internal accounting system within exactly 1 hour, the chief surgeon will be legally forced to cancel the entire operation and permanently reassign the surgical suite. $15,000 in 1 hour. The billing administrator stood there with her clipboard, her expression a mask of bureaucratic indifference. My joint accounts were locked. My personal credit was destroyed by the fraudulent secondary mortgage. Every asset I had built was hijacked to fund Bradley and Patricia's coastal fantasy. I had zero liquid capital. The administrator tapped her pen against the plastic clipboard, waiting for me to break down or produce a magical credit card. I did not break. The mechanical training from my years of military service completely overtook my rising panic. I looked directly into the administrator's eyes. I will have the funds secured within the hour. Do not cancel that surgical team. She gave me a skeptical nod and walked away. I grabbed my phone, stepping away from the intensive care unit doors. I bypassed my standard contacts and scrolled into the archived numbers I had not utilized since my honorable discharge. I found the listing for Major Thomas Hayes. He was my former commanding officer, a man who understood exactly what kind of pressure I could handle. I pressed dial, praying he had not changed his cellular number. The line rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. Major Hayes speaking. Sir, it is Sergeant Wilson. Olivia, I know it has been a long time, but I am in a catastrophic emergency and need immediate tactical support. The tone on the other end shifted instantly to absolute focus. Talk to me, Olivia. Give me the sitrep. I rapidly outlined the situation, presenting just the raw facts. I explained Lily's failing heart, the imminent surgery, and the devastating insurance denial triggered by my husband draining our accounts for a fraudulent real estate transaction. I needed $15,000 in 53 minutes to save her life. Patricia had relentlessly mocked my military service. She frequently referred to my enlistment as a misguided phase that I needed to scrub from my polite society resume. She sneered at my uniform and urged Bradley to steer me toward a domestic lifestyle. She genuinely believed serving my country was a lower-class endeavor to be hidden behind designer dresses and country club memberships. She was about to find out how wrong she was. The military was not a phase. It was a fiercely loyal brotherhood. Give me 2 minutes, Hayes barked. The Veterans Affairs Administration has a classified emergency medical grant designed for critical dependents of honorably discharged combat veterans. It is heavily buried in bureaucratic red tape, but I know the regional director personally. I pulled him from a burning Humvee outside Fallujah. He owes me his life. Stand by your phone and do not let that hospital administrator cancel the operation. The line clicked dead. I leaned against the cold hospital wall, staring at the digital clock on my screen. 48 minutes remaining. The silence of the corridor was agonizing. I watched the nurses moving in and out of Lily's room. They were preparing to transport her to the surgical suite, completely unaware that the procedure was hanging by a frayed financial thread. If that grant did not clear, they would detach the monitors and wheel her back to her bed to die. 30 minutes remaining. My phone stayed dark. I opened my laptop and checked the encrypted chat window with Kendra. She had successfully stalled the Malibu closing by demanding a completely new set of notarized signatures from the seller. Patricia was escalating her aggressive text messages. We were running out of time. 15 minutes remaining. The billing administrator reappeared at the end of the hallway, walking with deliberate final steps toward the pediatric unit. She had the cancellation forms printed and ready. I pushed myself off the wall and stepped into the center of the corridor, blocking her path to my daughter's room. Mrs. Wilson, she said, stopping 2 feet away. The hour has officially expired. I require the financial authorization code immediately, or I must notify the chief surgeon to stand down. I need 3 more minutes, I stated, locking my eyes onto hers with an unwavering, terrifying intensity. You will give me 3 minutes. She opened her mouth to argue. At that exact second, my cellular phone vibrated violently in my hand. I jerked it upward. It was a secure email notification from the Department of Veterans Affairs. I ripped open the digital document. It was a fully authorized, federally guaranteed emergency medical voucher for $25,000 assigned to Lily Wilson's surgical billing code. It contained the direct federal routing numbers and immediate clearance authorizations signed by the regional director himself. I shoved the glowing screen directly into the administrator's face. Here is your financial authorization. Federal funds immediately clearable directly from the United States government. Process the code and get the surgeon in that operating room. The administrator blinked rapidly, scanning the official seals. Her skeptical posture instantly dissolved into professional compliance. She tapped a series of commands into her tablet, verifying the numbers. The federal override cleared the hospital system in 10 seconds. Authorization confirmed, she said, stepping aside. Initiating transfer. I watched as the heavy double doors of the intensive care unit swung open. Two surgical nurses wheeled Lily's bed out into the corridor. She looked incredibly tiny, surrounded by the massive machines keeping her heart beating. I walked alongside the rolling bed, grasping her small hand, until we reached the restricted boundary of the surgical wing. The lead surgeon gave me a confident nod before pushing through the final set of doors. They were going to save her. The crushing weight suffocating my lungs lifted, replaced by a pure shot of adrenaline. I walked back to the desolate, sterile waiting room and sat down alone in the hard plastic chair. The hospital was quiet again. The immediate crisis was over. My daughter was safely in the hands of the surgical team. The battlefield was clear. I opened my laptop to text Kendra. Now we take the house. My phone buzzed immediately with Kendra's reply. The text message was brief, completely stripped of any legal hedging. You have until sunrise. If the seller does not receive a fully funded, legally binding entity to transfer the deed into by 6 in the morning, the entire escrow collapses. Bradley's stolen funds will trigger an automatic federal audit, and you will be caught in the crossfire of the investigation. We must intercept the asset before the banking commission freezes the board. I stared at the glowing screen, the harsh fluorescent lights of the surgical waiting room buzzing rhythmically above my head. The objective was terrifyingly clear. Bradley had meticulously structured Ocean Breeze LLC to be his untraceable personal fortress. He had illegally leveraged my home and siphoned his clients' escrow accounts to build a wall of cash, assuming his wife would be too distracted by our dying daughter to ever look at the digital ledgers. He wanted absolute control. I was going to give him absolute ruin. To hijack the Malibu property closing without triggering Bradley's automated digital alerts, I could not simply open another joint account or standard corporation. His mother, Patricia, had undoubtedly set up surveillance triggers on my primary Social Security number across the major credit bureaus. I needed an invisible, impenetrable financial vehicle. I needed an entity that superseded standard corporate law and operated entirely under the radar of commercial real estate tracking. I opened a fresh encrypted window on my laptop and began drafting the foundational documents for a blind medical trust. A blind medical trust, designed for a terminally ill dependent, is a highly specialized, fiercely protected legal fortress. It is heavily shielded by federal privacy laws, completely obscuring the internal assets from standard public record searches. More importantly, because Lily was a minor, undergoing a life-threatening medical procedure, the federal government allowed for expedited emergency formation of these specific trusts to protect incoming medical grants and charitable assets. I was going to use this compassionate legal loophole to swallow Bradley's luxury beach house whole. My fingers flew across the keyboard, downloading the specialized federal templates. The hospital waiting room remained dead and silent, save for the occasional soft chime of the elevator at the end of the hall. Every passing minute felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. Down the corridor, the surgical team was holding my daughter's heart in their hands. Here in the sterile quiet, I was holding the knife to my husband's throat. I designated the trust strictly in Lily's name. I structured the bylaws with ruthless military precision, ensuring the entity possessed the absolute maximum capacity to hold, manage, and liquidate high-value real estate assets. I named myself as the sole uncontested managing executor. I explicitly wrote in clauses that barred any other family member specifically naming Bradley and Patricia from accessing the trust's ledger, demanding information, or contesting the asset allocation. If they even attempted to look at the paperwork, they would be hit with an immediate federal privacy injunction. The clock in the lower right corner of my screen flashed 3 in the morning. I had 3 hours left to push the documentation through the automated state registry and secure a federal employer identification number. My eyes burned from exhaustion, but the icy clarity in my mind refused to falter. I attached the freshly generated Emergency Veterans Affairs grant approval to the trust application utilizing the Federal Authorization Code to immediately bypass the standard waiting period. The government system recognized the priority medical flag. The processing status bar turned green, initiating the automated digital review. I checked my secure chat with Kendra. "He is texting Jason," Kendra wrote. "Bradley is heavily intoxicated and bragging about closing the deal of the century. Patricia just emailed my office demanding the final deed transfer be executed the second the banks open. They are completely convinced they have won. Keep them celebrating." I typed back. My eyes locked on the spinning loading wheel of the Federal Registry portal. Let them drink their champagne. I am currently binding the forged secondary mortgage directly to the new trust. Since he used my signature to secure the primary debt, I am legally reassigning the collateral protection to Lily's entity. By establishing the blind medical trust as the superior lien holder, I was actively trapping Bradley's embezzled client funds inside the transaction. He had stolen the money to buy a house for himself. Instead, he was now blindly funding an impenetrable trust completely controlled by the woman he had tried to destroy. He would be left holding a massive toxic debt completely empty-handed while the Malibu deed vanished into an invisible vault. The digital loading wheel on my laptop screen suddenly stopped spinning. A crisp official federal seal materialized across the dark interface. The approval algorithm had accepted the medical priority override. A brand new, pristine 9-digit tax identification number populated at the top of the finalized legal document. The blind medical trust was officially active, legally binding, and completely invisible to Bradley's financial surveillance network. The hospital waiting room windows began to transition from pitch black to a bruised, stormy purple. Dawn was rapidly approaching. The 12-hour countdown was in its final critical minutes. My daughter was still fighting for her life behind a set of heavy surgical doors, and I had just successfully forged an impenetrable titanium shield around her future. I quickly highlighted the freshly generated routing numbers and the official trust identification digits. I dragged the encrypted file into the secure chat window and hit the send key. The heavy encrypted data packet transmitted instantly across the highly secure digital connection channel. I sat in the rigid plastic chair, the sudden silence of the morning pressing heavily against my exhausted shoulders. My cellular phone vibrated sharply against the table. I looked down at the glowing screen. Kendra had replied with a quick final message. "Deed transfer initiated, swapping LLC for the trust. They have no idea." I stared at Kendra's text as the first rays of dawn pierced the hospital waiting room window. The bait was in the water, and Bradley was about to swallow the hook. Across town, in whatever luxury hotel suite he was currently occupying with his latest distraction, Bradley's phone vibrated with an urgent notification. It was a certified DocuSign link originating directly from Kendra's prestigious law firm. He was likely nursing a severe hangover, his arrogant mind fueled by the delusion of total victory. He desperately wanted this Malibu property. He wanted the status, the ocean view, and the ultimate proof that he had successfully outsmarted everyone, especially his wife. I could perfectly picture his smug expression as he opened the digital packet. The preliminary documents looked exactly as they had the previous afternoon. Kendra had flawlessly maintained the illusion of the Ocean Breeze LLC on the cover pages, appeasing his superficial ego. He scrolled right past the standard liability waivers, the environmental disclosures, and the municipal tax acknowledgments. He completely ignored the dense, complex legal jargon that he always claimed was beneath his pay grade. He just wanted the keys. He swiped his finger down to page 47. He did not read the single devastating paragraph Kendra had expertly buried beneath a mountain of mundane boilerplate text. The clause officially and irrevocably substituted his fraudulent corporate shell company with the newly minted blind medical trust, naming my terminally ill daughter as the sole beneficiary and myself as the uncontested executor. He reached the final digital signature block. Without a single moment of hesitation or due diligence, Bradley typed his name and tapped the green confirmation button. The digital ink dried instantly. The system locked the documents. The transaction was mathematically and legally sealed. The $350,000 of stolen client escrow funds were officially absorbed successfully, purchasing a multi-million-dollar beachfront estate that now belonged entirely to the woman he was actively trying to destroy. He was financially vaporized, and he had literally signed his own execution order. A soft melodic chime from my laptop confirmed the receipt of the final countersigned closing packet. I downloaded the PDF, my eyes immediately dropping to page 47 to verify his electronic signature. It was there, bold and undeniably authentic. The Malibu property was secured. The trap had snapped shut with lethal precision. I closed the laptop, sliding it carefully into my leather tote bag. The financial war was won, but the physical reality of the hospital corridor instantly pulled me back to the present. The digital victory meant absolutely nothing if the surgical team failed. I stood up and began pacing the length of the waiting room, my footsteps echoing against the polished linoleum. The minutes dragged by with agonizing slowness. 7 in the morning came and went, then 8. The morning shift change brought a fresh wave of nurses and administrative staff bustling through the halls with fresh coffees and crisp scrubs. I remained anchored to my plastic chair, my hands clasped tightly together, praying to any force that would listen. Every time the surgical suite doors swung open, my lungs seized. Finally, at 9:15, the heavy doors parted, and the lead pediatric cardiologist stepped out into the hallway. He pulled his surgical mask down his shoulders, dropping in a clear display of exhaustion. I sprinted across the waiting area, my heart hammering against my ribs. I braced myself for the worst, preparing to hear that the damage was too extensive or that her tiny body had rejected the hardware. The surgeon stopped looking directly into my terrified eyes. A slow, genuine smile spread across his tired face. The procedure was a complete success, he announced, his voice steady and calm. We successfully implanted the pacemaker, and her body accepted the device without a single complication. Her heart rate has completely stabilized. She is resting comfortably in the pediatric recovery wing, and her vitals are reading perfectly. She is going to be just fine, Mrs. Wilson. You can see her in a few minutes. I collapsed against the wall, a raw, ragged sob tearing from my throat. The crushing terror that had suffocated me for days instantly evaporated, replaced by a profound, overwhelming wave of relief. I pressed my hands to my face, crying hot, silent tears of pure gratitude. 10 minutes later, I walked quietly into the dimly lit recovery room. Lily was asleep, her chest rising and falling with a steady, strong, mechanical rhythm that sounded like an absolute miracle. The pale, fragile tint of her skin had already been replaced by a healthy, vital flush. I stepped up to the edge of the bed and gently brushed a lock of damp hair from her forehead. I leaned down and pressed a long, soft kiss against her skin, breathing in the scent of her. I promised to protect her, and I had delivered. My daughter was safe, securely shielded by federal law and medical science. I stood up and turned away from the bed. The vulnerable, terrified mother vanished, completely replaced by a cold, calculating professional. I walked into the attached private bathroom and locked the door. I stripped off the rumpled coffee-stained sweater and jeans I had been wearing for 2 days. I pulled a sharp, tailored black suit and a crisp white silk blouse from the garment bag Kendra had messaged a courier to drop off at the front desk. I applied my makeup with sharp, aggressive strokes, pulling my hair back into a severe, commanding twist. I slipped my feet into black leather pumps, feeling the armor of my corporate identity lock into place. I stepped into the recovery room, grabbing purse and keys from the table. I looked at Lily one last time, my resolve hardening into solid steel. I walked out of the hospital, my heels clicking sharply against the pavement. The morning sun was blinding. I unlocked my car and texted Kendra, "Now we take the house." The engine of my sedan roared to life, a low, steady rumble that perfectly matched the steady rhythm of my newly forged resolve. I pulled out of the hospital parking garage, the tires gripping the concrete, as I navigated the tight spiral ramp toward the exit. The transition from the sterile, artificially illuminated confines of the surgical ward to the blinding brilliance of the California morning was jarring. I merged onto the Pacific Coast Highway, rolling my window down just a fraction. The crisp, salty ocean air flooded the cabin entirely, replacing the lingering scent of clinical antiseptics, an absolute terror that had clung to my skin for the past 48 hours. To my right, the Pacific Ocean stretched out toward the horizon, a magnificent expanse of glittering turquoise waves crashing rhythmically against the rugged shoreline. It was a breathtaking postcard-perfect day in Southern California. The sky was an uninterrupted, pristine blue. Flocks of seabirds drifted lazily on the coastal thermals. Everything outside the glass of my windshield radiated warmth, tranquility, and effortless beauty. Inside the car, however, the atmosphere was absolute zero. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel with calculated, terrifying precision. The cold, mechanical fury that had carried me through the night remained perfectly intact, acting as a flawless protective armor around my mind. I was no longer operating on fear or panic. Every single movement I made was deliberate, stripped of all hesitation. I drove smoothly, matching the speed of the morning traffic, my eyes fixed sharply on the winding coastal road ahead. My cellular phone vibrated against the center console, connecting instantly to the vehicle audio system. A notification flashed across the digital dashboard display, indicating a newly deposited voicemail. The caller identification displayed Patricia's name. I reached out and pressed the green playback icon on the touchscreen. Her voice immediately filled the car, echoing through the speakers with that familiar grating tone of aristocratic superiority and manufactured sweetness. "Olivia. Darling." Patricia began the background noise of her recording, filled with the distinct clinking of crystal glasses and the chaotic chatter of party planners. "I am simply calling to inform you that we are making some minor adjustments to the afternoon schedule. Bradley is currently dealing with the final banking transfers, which were delayed because of your incredibly inconvenient timing regarding Lily. We are pushing the main housewarming reception to 1 o'clock. We have a highly exclusive roster of elite guests arriving, including the managing directors from Bradley's brokerage and several prominent city council members. I have instructed the caterers to begin serving the caviar and champagne on the oceanfront terrace directly upon their arrival." She paused, letting out a sharp, theatrical sigh that translated perfectly over the digital connection. "I do hope you have sorted out whatever minor billing issue you claimed was happening at that dreary hospital. Honestly, causing such a dramatic disruption, right when Bradley is finalizing the most important real estate acquisition of his entire career, is terribly selfish. We absolutely cannot have your negative energy ruining this celebration. Do stay away until you can present a properly supportive attitude. We simply cannot have our guests subjected to your incessant domestic complaints. Bradley deserves this beautiful moment. He has worked far too hard for this property to let your manufactured crises cast a shadow over his ultimate triumph. Ta-ta." The voicemail disconnected with a sharp electronic beep. I did not scream. I did not strike the steering wheel. I simply smiled, a razor-thin, predatory expression that felt entirely foreign on my face. Her message was a masterclass in narcissistic delusion, perfectly encapsulating the staggering arrogance that had fueled their entire criminal enterprise. Patricia completely believed her own narrative. She viewed my daughter's failing heart as a minor scheduling conflict, a bothersome logistical hurdle standing in the way of her champagne toasts and social climbing. She truly thought they had won. She believed they had successfully stolen my identity, leveraged my home, drained the client escrow accounts, and purchased a seaside fortress without a single consequence. They had actively planned to leave me bankrupt and grieving in a hospital waiting room while they entertained local politicians on a multi-million-dollar terrace, paid for entirely with stolen money and my forged signature. They were currently celebrating their brilliant financial maneuver, completely oblivious to the fact that Bradley had blindly signed the entire estate over to a federally protected medical trust controlled exclusively by me. They were throwing a lavish, extravagant party in a house they did not legally own. Every single bite of caviar they served, every drop of champagne they poured, was happening inside Lily's property. The sheer, unadulterated hubris of their celebration was the final piece of fuel I needed. The lingering traces of fatigue from staying awake all night fighting the hospital billing department and drafting complex federal trust documents instantly burned away. My military training, the very background they constantly sneered at as low-class and unsophisticated, had already provided the tactical discipline required to outmaneuver them. I navigated the final curve of the Pacific Coast Highway, smoothly decelerating, as the geographic coordinates Kendra had provided flashed on my navigation screen. I signaled and turned left onto a highly restricted private coastal road lined with towering palm trees and manicured hedges. The property emerged at the end of the long driveway, a breathtaking architectural masterpiece of glass, steel, and pale stone, situated directly against the crashing surf. It was stunningly beautiful, an absolute fortress of coastal wealth. A temporary valet station had already been erected near the massive wrought iron front gates. 5 attendants in matching red vests were frantically rushing to park a steady stream of incoming luxury vehicles. Mercedes Range Rovers and a gleaming silver Porsche lined the pristine circular motor court. I shifted the transmission into park, turning the engine off. I grabbed my black leather tote bag, took one final deep breath, and confidently opened the heavy car door. I bypassed the frantic valet stand, entirely tossing my keys to a thoroughly confused parking attendant before walking straight up the sweeping, perfectly manicured, hand-laid cobblestone driveway. The sheer magnificent scale of the beachfront property was absolutely staggering. Towering double doors of imported mahogany stood wide open, welcoming the coastal breeze and a steady stream of Los Angeles elite. I stepped seamlessly into the grand foyer, my black leather pumps clicking against the pristine white marble floors. The air was thick with the scent of expensive catered seafood, sea salt, and the subtle notes of $100 perfume. Beyond the foyer, the massive oceanfront terrace hosted a living ecosystem of wealth and unchecked arrogance. Waitstaff in crisp, pristine white uniforms circulated smoothly among the distracted guests, carrying heavy silver trays fully loaded with beluga caviar and delicate crystal flutes constantly bubbling with expensive vintage champagne. A string quartet played a sophisticated classical arrangement near the infinity pool, providing the perfect acoustic backdrop for Bradley's monumental illusion. I moved through the crowd with absolute predatory silence. The guests were a predictable mix of real estate moguls, high-powered corporate executives, and minor local politicians. They wore breezy, perfectly tailored coastal attire, laughing loudly while congratulating each other on their collective brilliance. I stood silently in my severe black power suit and crisp white silk blouse, a harsh, dark contrast to their vibrant, sun-drenched celebration, completely invisible to the powerful people who did not know my actual face. I spotted Bradley immediately. He was standing near the edge of the terrace holding court with 3 older men who wore the distinct, satisfied expressions of managing directors. Bradley held a crystal glass in his right hand, his teeth gleaming as he recounted whatever fabricated story he had invented about securing this magnificent estate. He looked completely relaxed, entirely unburdened by the fact that he had stolen $350,000 from his own clients and forged his wife's signature to stand on that exact spot. He was playing the role of the self-made conqueror to absolute perfection. I did not approach him. I simply stood by a massive stone pillar, watching the performance, letting the cold reality of his treason wash over me. The sterile hospital, the agonizing terror of Lily's failing heart, the frantic midnight hours spent meticulously building a legal fortress to stop my own total financial ruin. It all violently collided with the loud sound of his deeply arrogant laughter. My quiet observation did not last long. Across the terrace, standing near a towering display of white orchids, Patricia turned her head. Her eyes swept across the crowd and locked directly onto mine. For a fraction of a second, shock registered on her meticulously preserved face. She had undoubtedly expected me to be weeping in a sterile waiting room, completely crushed by the weight of my impending bankruptcy and my daughter's surgical crisis. Seeing me standing in her son's stolen fortress wearing a power suit and an expression of absolute ice short-circuited her brain. The shock instantly vanished, replaced by a surge of unadulterated, vicious fury. She slammed her champagne flute onto a passing waiter's tray and marched directly toward me. Her heels struck the stone terrace like gunshots, her jaw set in a tight, furious line. Patricia did not believe in discreet family disagreements. She weaponized public humiliation, utilizing an audience to break her targets. "What in the world do you think you are doing here?" she demanded, her voice carrying an intentional, piercing volume that caused the nearest group of guests to immediately stop talking. "I instructed you explicitly to stay away from this property." I stood my ground and stared at her, maintaining absolute, unbreakable silence. My refusal to shrink back only fueled her rage. She turned her head, projecting her voice across the terrace. "Security. I need security over here immediately. We have a trespasser." More guests turned to stare. The string quartet faltered slightly in the background before quickly recovering their steady rhythm. "This is a private, exclusive celebration for invited guests only," Patricia announced loudly, making sure the managing directors and socialites could hear every single syllable. "You are not welcome here. You are completely out of your mind if you think you can just walk in off the street and ruin my son's monumental achievement. You need to leave this property right now, or I will have you physically removed as a hostile stranger." The commotion had successfully drawn the exact attention she wanted, including Bradley's. He excused himself from his group of executives and rushed over, his face flushed a deep, panicked crimson. He violently grabbed my arm, his fingers digging painfully into the fragile silk of my blouse, and forcibly pulled me a few rapid steps away from the curious gathering crowd. "Are you completely insane?" he hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of terror and suppressed rage. "What is wrong with you? This is the most important day of my entire professional career. I am standing 20 feet away from the senior partners of my brokerage. They are looking right at us. You are actively humiliating me in front of the people who determine my future." He released my arm, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Go back to the hospital. Go back to the house. I do not care where you go, but get off my property. You are ruining my big moment because you are too pathetic to handle a simple medical delay." I stood perfectly still, letting his cruel, desperate words echo in the coastal breeze. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I did not defend myself against Patricia's public spectacle or Bradley's vicious accusations. I simply reached into the pocket of my tailored jacket. I pulled out my smartphone, the glass screen cool against my palm. I unlocked the device with a swipe of my thumb and calmly opened a specific, highly encrypted application. My thumb hovered over the glowing icon of the master control application for just a fraction of a second. Bradley had always been obsessed with cutting-edge technology, insisting that his new coastal fortress be fully integrated with a centralized smart home system. He wanted the ability to control the lighting, the temperature, the security, and the audio-visual network from the palm of his hand. He had bragged about it endlessly during the initial planning phases. What he completely failed to understand was that the system required a verified primary network administrator. Since the property was legally registered to the Blind Medical Trust, the automated security protocols recognized my credentials as the absolute overriding authority. I bypassed his secondary user access with a single decisive tap. The response was instantaneous. The elegant, sweeping classical music that had been floating across the oceanfront terrace abruptly died. It did not fade out or skip a beat. It was brutally severed, leaving a sudden deafening vacuum of sound in its wake. The sudden silence was so jarring that several conversations around us immediately halted. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes stopped. The low murmur of the Los Angeles elite evaporated into the salty coastal breeze. Heads turned in our direction, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere. Bradley blinked, his fingers twitching in confusion as he looked up toward the hidden exterior speakers. He reached into his own tailored jacket, instinctively going for his phone to fix what he assumed was a minor technical glitch. I did not give him the chance to even unlock his screen. I tapped a second icon, activating the master audiovisual override. Inside the sprawling open-concept living room and across the expansive outdoor entertainment pavilion, every single digital display roared to life simultaneously. The massive 85-inch flat screens mounted above the modern fireplaces, the sleek monitors positioned at the outdoor bar, and the enormous drop-down projection wall in the primary media room all flared with blinding white light. The synchronized activation drew every eye in the house. The screens did not display high-definition artwork or ambient coastal scenery. Instead, the brilliant white background framed a crisp, high-resolution image of the finalized, legally binding property deed. It was the exact digital document Bradley had hurriedly signed on his phone just hours ago, completely unbothered by the fine print. I had instructed the system to magnify the specific devastating clauses he had ignored. Across every screen, massive bold black letters dominated the visual space. The text was impossible to miss, formatted to be easily legible even from the furthest edges of the manicured lawn. Owner, the Lilly Medical Trust. Executor, Olivia Wilson. Financial status, paid in full. The digital signature block, prominently featuring Bradley's own frantic electronic authorization, was highlighted in bright red. Beside it, the official federal tax identification number of the trust glowed in emerald green, validating the transfer of absolute ownership. A collective audible gasp rippled across the terrace. The sound was a visceral mixture of shock, confusion, and dawning comprehension. These were not ordinary guests. They were real estate moguls, corporate attorneys, and banking executives. They knew exactly what a property deed looked like, and they instantly recognized the legal weight of a registered federal trust. They understood the terminology, the signature blocks, and the undeniable reality projected in front of them. The whispers started immediately spreading like wildfire through the crowd. I watched as the senior partners from Bradley's brokerage set their champagne glasses down on the nearest tables. Their faces transformed from relaxed celebration to sharp, calculating professionalism. They were reading the screens, analyzing the data, and connecting the dots. They realized they were currently drinking stolen champagne at a party hosted by a man who had just surrendered his prized acquisition to his estranged wife. The whispers escalated into loud, urgent conversations. The socialites pointed at the massive displays, their eyes darting between the projected documents and Bradley's rigid form. The pristine illusion of his unmatched success was shattering in real time, broadcasted in glorious high definition across his own stolen fortress. Bradley stood completely paralyzed. His eyes were locked on the nearest flat screen mounted above the outdoor bar. I watched the blood drain from his face, leaving his tanned skin a sickly ashen gray. His jaw went slack. His perfectly styled corporate armor seemed to dissolve, leaving behind a terrified hollow shell of a man. His brain was desperately trying to process the catastrophic reality of page 47. He was mentally replaying his morning, remembering the rushed signature, the arrogant assumption that he had outsmarted my legal team, and the fatal mistake of ignoring the fine print. His breathing turned shallow and ragged. The $350,000 of embezzled client funds were gone, legally absorbed by the trust. The house was gone. His leverage, his power, and his entire future were completely vaporized. He turned his head slowly, looking at me as if I were a ghost. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound emerged. His knees buckled slightly, and he had to grab the edge of a nearby stone planter to keep himself from physically collapsing onto the terrace floor. Patricia, however, possessed an entirely different survival instinct: denial. She stared at the projection wall, her chest heaving with erratic, panicked breaths, her manicured hands curled into tight fists. She could not accept the undeniable truth glowing above her. It fundamentally contradicted her entire worldview. She spun around, her eyes wild, and pointed a trembling finger directly at my face. "This is a fake!" Patricia screamed, her voice cracking, echoing shrilly across the stunned, silent crowd. "This is a malicious, fabricated lie." She hacked the system. "Turn those screens off right now. It is a fake." I did not flinch. I slowly slipped my smartphone back into my pocket. I looked right at Patricia, then at Bradley, and finally allowed a cold, serene smile to completely touch my lips. The pristine silence of the oceanfront terrace amplified the absolute panic radiating from my mother-in-law. Patricia continued to shriek, her perfectly manicured hands wildly gesturing toward the massive digital displays that illuminated her son's catastrophic failure. She demanded that the catering staff unplug the screens, completely oblivious to the fact that the smart home system was entirely hardwired into the architectural framework. The surrounding crowd of Los Angeles elites, local politicians, and senior managing directors did not move to assist her. They stood perfectly still, their expensive champagne warming in their hands, their eyes darting between the irrefutable federal documents projected on the walls and the crumbling facade of the man hosting them. I stepped away from the stone pillar, the rhythmic clicking of my black leather pumps cutting through the coastal breeze. I walked directly toward the center of the patio, moving with the calculated precision of a predator circling its trapped prey. Bradley stumbled backward, as I approached, his breathing shallow and rapid. He looked like a man standing on the trapdoor of a gallows, suddenly realizing the rope was already tight around his neck. "You do not own this house, Bradley. Our daughter does," I announced clearly, my voice echoing through the silent room. The words hung in the air, sharp and absolutely definitive. Bradley shook his head, his mouth opening and closing as he desperately searched for a lie that could save him. He raised a trembling hand, attempting to project authority to his watching colleagues, but his voice cracked under the crushing weight of reality. "You cannot do this," he stammered, his eyes wide with terror. "I orchestrated this entire acquisition. I funded the escrow account. I signed the final transfer paperwork this morning. This is my property. You have no legal standing here." I smiled, the expression devoid of any warmth or mercy. "You are half right," I replied, projecting my voice so the senior partners from his brokerage could hear every single syllable. "You did sign the final transfer paperwork this morning. You authorized a certified digital contract originating from my attorney. However, you were so blinded by your own arrogance and so incredibly desperate to secure this estate that you failed to read the execution clauses on page 47. You blindly signed a legally binding addendum that substituted your fraudulent shell company with a federally protected blind medical trust." Bradley grabbed the edge of the outdoor bar, his knuckles turning white as his legs threatened to give out. Patricia gasped, her face turning a sickly shade of gray as she finally began to comprehend the magnitude of the trap. "You see, Bradley, you made one fatal miscalculation when you decided to siphon your clients' escrow accounts to build your little beachfront empire." I continued, my tone conversational, but laced with absolute venom. "You assumed I was too distracted by Lily fighting for her life in a hospital bed to notice your financial maneuvers. You assumed I was weak. But your most critical mistake was using my primary social security number to secure the secondary funding layer. By forging my signature to guarantee the primary debt, you unwittingly gave me the absolute legal right to alter the closing structures via my attorney." The gasps from the surrounding guests were audible. The managing directors from his firm immediately stepped backward, physically distancing themselves from a man who had just been publicly outed for committing severe financial fraud. I watched their expressions harden. Bradley's career was officially vaporized. He would be facing a federal audit before the banks opened on Monday morning, and the men standing on this terrace would be the ones handing him over to the authorities. I legally reassigned the collateral protection directly to Lily's entity, I explained, watching his eyes widen in pure, unadulterated horror. You spent $350,000 of stolen money to purchase a multi-million-dollar property that now belongs entirely to the daughter you abandoned. The trust is impenetrable. It is shielded by federal medical privacy laws. You cannot touch the house, you cannot access the equity, and you are left holding a massive, highly toxic debt that you can never repay. You wanted absolute control, Bradley. You bought your own ruin. Patricia lunged forward, her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred, but she stopped dead in her tracks when I reached into my tote bag. I slowly pulled out a heavy silver keyring holding the physical master keys to the estate. The metal jingled softly, the sound cutting through the thick, suffocating tension on the terrace. I walked past Bradley and Patricia, moving gracefully toward the edge of the custom infinity pool that blended seamlessly with the Pacific Ocean horizon. The sun was setting, casting long, dramatic shadows across the pristine stone patio. I held the keys up, letting the silver catch the fading sunlight. I am the sole executor, I stated, my voice ringing out with absolute final authority over the crowd. I just changed all the digital security codes. The automated locks will engage in exactly 10 minutes. Anyone remaining inside the perimeter of this estate after that time will be arrested for criminal trespassing on a federally protected medical property. I turned my head, locking eyes with Bradley one last time. I wanted to sear the image of his total destruction into my memory. He was completely broken, financially annihilated, and socially ruined. He had nothing left. You have exactly 10 minutes to vacate my daughter's property. I opened my hand and dangled the master keys directly over the water. I held them there for 3 seconds, letting his eviction sink into his bones. Then I uncurled my fingers. I dropped the keys into the deep end of the pool. They hit the water with a sharp splash, sinking rapidly to the bottom of the illuminated blue basin. I turned my back on my husband, my mother-in-law, and their stunned audience and walked out. 2 days passed in a strange, suspended state of quiet. I stood in the center of my small, sterile apartment, carefully folding soft cotton pajamas and placing them into a small canvas duffel bag. The rhythmic, methodical act of packing Lily's belongings provided a necessary anchor. The hospital had called an hour earlier with cautiously optimistic news. Lily was stabilizing. Her heart monitor showed steady rhythms, and her doctors were finally discussing a timeline for moving her out of the intensive care unit. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the crushing weight of pure dark terror had lifted from my chest. I packed her favorite stuffed elephant, smoothing its worn ears, completely focused on the logistics of her transition. The apartment was completely silent, a sharp contrast to the chaotic public destruction I had orchestrated on that oceanfront terrace 48 hours prior. I had not heard a single word from Bradley or Patricia since I dropped those silver master keys into the glowing infinity pool. I knew the silence was not surrender. It was the desperate, scrambling quiet of cornered predators trying to figure out how to escape a trap they built themselves. I zipped the canvas bag closed, placing it neatly by the front entrance. I walked into the kitchen to pour a glass of cold water, relishing the absolute tranquility of my reclaimed space. The tranquility shattered instantly. A sudden violent pounding erupted at my front door. The sheer force of the impact rattled the picture frames hanging on the nearby hallway wall. It was not a knock. It was a brutal, sustained assault against the heavy wooden door, echoing through the small apartment like localized thunder. I froze in the kitchen, the glass of water halfway to my lips. The pounding stopped for a fraction of a second, only to resume with even greater ferocity. The wood groaned under the weight of someone throwing their entire body against the barrier. I did not flinch. I slowly set the glass down on the granite counter, my movements perfectly controlled. I walked silently down the narrow hallway, my bare feet making no sound against the hardwood floor. I stopped 2 feet away from the vibrating door, watching the brass deadbolt rattle against its housing. I did not need to look through the peephole to know who was standing in the hallway. The chaotic, desperate energy radiating through the solid wood was unmistakable. Bradley had finally tracked me down, and he had brought every ounce of his ruined ego with him. "Open this door right now," Bradley screamed. His voice was completely unrecognizable. The smooth, polished corporate cadence he used to charm managing directors and wealthy clients was entirely gone. It was replaced by a raw, unhinged screech that tore through the hallway. "I know you are in there. Open the door or I swear I will break it off the hinges." I remained absolutely silent, standing perfectly still with my arms crossed over my chest. I watched the door shake, feeling a cold, clinical satisfaction at his total loss of control. He slammed his fists against the wood again, his breathing ragged and heavy. "You think you won?" he yelled, his voice cracking with pure venom. "You think you can just embarrass me in front of the senior partners, steal my property and walk away? You are completely delusional. I have spent the last 2 days with the most aggressive corporate litigators in Los Angeles. They are going to tear that blind trust apart piece by piece. We are going to drag you through federal court until you are absolutely bankrupt. I will destroy your reputation so thoroughly that you will never work in this state again. You are nothing without me. You hear me. You are nothing." I listened to his frantic ranting without moving a single muscle. His threats of litigation were pathetic, empty words from a man who no longer had the financial resources to hire a paralegal, let alone a team of corporate sharks. But his next words forced my jaw to clench. "I am filing for full immediate physical custody of Lily Bradley," hissed, his mouth pressed directly against the gap between the door and the frame. His voice dripped with a sick, desperate malice. "You made her the sole beneficiary of that estate. Once the judge grants me full custody, I become the legal guardian of her assets. I will control the trust. I will take back my house, and I will make sure you never see a single dime of that money. You played a stupid game, Olivia. You thought you were so clever using our sick daughter as a shield. I am going to use her to take back everything you stole from me. Open this door." His vile threat regarding our daughter was the exact confirmation I needed to execute my final maneuver. He did not care about Lily. She was nothing more than a convenient financial loophole in his twisted mind. I reached into the front pocket of my tailored trousers and slowly withdrew a crisp, thick white business card. I knelt down silently on the cold hardwood floor, aligning the rigid card with the narrow gap beneath the heavy door. I firmly slid the card underneath the wooden barrier, pushing it directly over the threshold until it touched the tips of his expensive leather shoes. The elegant black font printed across the heavy cardstock displayed a single devastating message: "Mediation hearing 9 a.m. tomorrow." The aggressive pounding abruptly ceased as he noticed the piece of paper. While Bradley bent down to retrieve the document, I calmly unlocked my smartphone. I dialed the local police precinct to report a hostile, unhinged trespasser who was actively threatening my physical safety. I listened to his muffled gasp of absolute horror from the hallway as I explicitly requested that 2 armed officers immediately arrive and physically escort my estranged husband permanently off of the private residential premises. The mediation room at the downtown legal center was a masterclass in sterile corporate intimidation. The walls were painted a stark, unforgiving white, devoid of any artwork or distraction. A massive frosted glass table dominated the center of the space, reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights glaring overhead. I sat on one side of the table, perfectly centered, my hands resting lightly in my lap. The air conditioning hummed with a low mechanical drone that did nothing to mask the suffocating tension trapped within the 4 walls. Across from me sat a trio of predators desperately trying to project an aura of absolute invincibility. Bradley occupied the center chair on his side. He had spent the morning carefully reconstructing his shattered corporate armor. He wore a pristine navy blue suit, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie, attempting to look like the wealthy, commanding executive he no longer was. However, the dark circles under his eyes and the slight tremor in his right hand betrayed the immense psychological toll of the past 48 hours. He was running on pure adrenaline and blind panic, trying to force a victory through sheer intimidation. To his immediate right sat a man who reeked of overpriced billable hours and ruthless aggression. This was his high-priced shark attorney. The man wore a bespoke gray pinstripe suit and sported a perfectly trimmed silver beard. He had slapped his thick leather briefcase onto the glass table the moment he entered, organizing his legal pads with sharp, aggressive movements. He did not look at me as a human being. He looked at me as an obstacle to be systematically destroyed. He possessed the distinct, arrogant swagger of a man entirely accustomed to bullying vulnerable women into submission during high-stakes divorces. To Bradley's left sat Patricia. She had absolutely no legal standing to be in a closed mediation hearing, but she had physically forced her way past the receptionist and refused to leave the room. The presiding mediator, a quiet, weary-looking man sitting at the head of the table, had attempted to ask her to step outside. Patricia had simply glared at him, daring him to call security. Given the explosive nature of the conflict, the mediator had relented, prioritizing starting the session over a physical altercation in the waiting room. Patricia sat rigidly in her chair, her jaw set, radiating pure, unadulterated malice. She wore a severe black dress, her posture rigid, her eyes locked onto me with the intensity of a striking viper. The mediator cleared his throat, opening the file in front of him. Before he could even state the date and purpose of the gathering for the official record, Bradley's attorney launched his opening assault. He leaned forward, bracing his forearms on the glass table, attempting to dominate the physical space. "We are not here to negotiate a compromise," the lawyer stated, his voice a deep, resonant baritone engineered to intimidate. "We are here to rectify a gross, malicious manipulation of federal property law. My client has been the victim of a coordinated, fraudulent entrapment scheme orchestrated by his estranged wife. We are demanding the immediate, unconditional dissolution of the Lilly Medical Trust. We require the deed to the coastal property to be transferred directly back to my client's holding company by 5 o'clock today. Furthermore, given the mother's clearly unstable, vindictive mental state, we are formally petitioning for an emergency order granting my client full, exclusive physical and legal custody of the minor child." The brazen cruelty of using Lily as a bartering chip hung in the air. Bradley did not even flinch at the mention of the daughter he had neglected. He simply puffed out his chest, looking incredibly satisfied with his attorney's opening barrage. He believed he had successfully terrified me. Patricia leaned across the table, her face coming dangerously close to the center line. She ignored the mediator's weak protest regarding proper protocol. Her eyes narrowed into dark, hateful slits. She dropped her voice to a harsh, venomous whisper that carried clearly across the glass. "You think paper tricks scare us?" Patricia hissed, her tone dripping with absolute contempt. "You think you can waltz into my son's house and steal what he built? We will drain you in court fees until you are sleeping on the streets. We will drag out every single motion, every single injunction, and every single custody hearing until you are utterly bankrupt and begging us to stop. You will lose that trust. You will lose the house. You will lose the child. You picked a fight with the wrong family, Olivia. We will break you." I sat in complete, terrifying silence. I did not break eye contact with Patricia. I did not shift my weight in my chair. I did not offer a single word of defense, denial, or counterargument. The complete absence of any emotional reaction from my side of the table acted like a vacuum, sucking the momentum out of their aggressive posturing. Bradley's smug expression began to falter slightly. His lawyer frowned, clearly unnerved by a target who refused to cry, defend herself, or cower in fear. They expected a hysterical, desperate woman begging for her daughter. Instead, they were facing a stone wall. The silence stretched on, becoming heavy, oppressive, and profoundly uncomfortable. The ticking of the wall clock echoed loudly. Patricia's rigid posture began to crack. She opened her mouth to launch another volley of threats, her face flushing with renewed anger at my total lack of submission. I simply watched them squirm under the crushing weight of their own rapidly escalating panic. They had exhausted their entire arsenal of manufactured intimidation, leaving them with absolutely nothing but hollow, unadulterated, desperate rage. I knew that their carefully constructed illusion of legal superiority was about to be completely obliterated in just a few very short moments. The heavy oak door swung open with a smooth, decisive click that shattered the suffocating tension in the room. Every head at the table snapped toward the entrance. Kendra stepped over the threshold, moving with the kind of absolute, undeniable authority that instantly commanded the space. She wore a perfectly tailored charcoal pantsuit, her heels clicking against the polished floor with a rhythmic, predatory cadence. The air in the mediation room shifted immediately. She bypassed the empty chairs near the entrance and walked straight toward my side of the massive frosted glass table. She did not even look at Bradley. She did not look at the shark attorney. She entirely ignored Patricia's presence. Instead, Kendra stopped directly beside my chair and placed her sleek monogrammed leather briefcase onto the glass surface with a heavy, deliberate thud. She pulled out the chair to my right, smoothed her jacket, and sat down. Bradley blinked, his forehead wrinkling in profound confusion. He leaned back in his chair, the aggressive posture he had maintained moments ago completely evaporating. He looked at Kendra, then at me, and then back at Kendra, his brain visibly struggling to process the sudden intrusion. Patricia mirrored his deep confusion. Her posture stiffened. She shot a look at the mediator, demanding an explanation, but the mediator simply sat quietly with his hands folded over his files. Bradley finally broke the silence, his voice lacking its previous venom, replaced now by a bewildered, almost juvenile uncertainty. "What in the world are you doing here?" he demanded, staring at his sister-in-law as if she had just materialized from thin air. "This is a closed, confidential legal proceeding. You have absolutely no right to be in this building. Get out before I have security throw you out of here right now." Kendra did not flinch. She slowly unclasped the brass latches of her briefcase, the metallic sound ringing sharply in the quiet room. She looked up, her gaze locking onto Bradley with an expression of pure, unadulterated ice. She allowed a sharp, lethal smile to touch the corners of her mouth. "I am exactly where I am supposed to be." "Bradley," she stated, her voice projecting a chilling, professional calm. "I am the legal counsel for the plaintiff. I represent Olivia, and I represent the interests of the Lilly Medical Trust. You see, while you were hiring a glorified divorce bully to threaten an unrepresented woman, Olivia was securing a federal litigator who specializes in corporate fraud and asset recovery. That would be me." The high-priced shark lawyer sitting next to Bradley stopped organizing his legal pads. He looked at Kendra, recognizing the distinct shift in the power dynamic. He understood immediately that the easy victory he had promised his client was no longer on the table. He adjusted his silk tie, clearing his throat to regain control of the room. "Now listen here, counsel," he began, using a patronizing tone designed to put her in her place. "My client has suffered a massive financial injury due to a fraudulent manipulation of real estate closing documents. We are demanding immediate restitution, or we will be forced to pursue aggressive litigation." Kendra ignored him completely. She withdrew a meticulously organized stack of documents from her briefcase and spread them across the glass table. She smoothed the pages with the palm of her hand, her eyes locked on Bradley. "Let us talk about litigation, Bradley," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, measured register. "You want to threaten my client with a custody battle to gain leverage over a medical trust. That is a bold strategy for a man who is currently facing an absolute avalanche of federal indictments. Let me methodically walk you through the exact statutes you have violated over the past 30 days, just in case your overpriced attack dog here failed to properly advise you of your criminal exposure." Kendra tapped a manicured fingernail against the first document. "Let us start with United States Code Title 18, Section 1028. Aggravated identity theft. You utilized Olivia's primary social security number without her knowledge or legal consent to secure the secondary funding layer for your shell company. You deliberately forged her digital signature on 4 separate bank authorizations. We have the IP addresses, the timestamps, and the digital routing certificates, proving those signatures originated from your personal laptop. That alone carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 2 years in federal prison, entirely separate from any underlying felony charges. Bradley swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically toward his lawyer. The shark attorney held up a hand, attempting to interrupt, but Kendra cut him off with a razor-sharp glare. "I am not finished," she snapped. "We also have United States Code Title 18, Section 1343, wire fraud. You electronically transferred $350,000 from your client's escrow accounts into a private holding company. You transmitted fraudulent financial representations across state lines to secure the primary mortgage. You submitted fabricated income statements to the underwriting bank, deliberately misrepresenting your liquid assets. That is bank fraud, Bradley. It is a direct violation of Section 1344, which carries a maximum penalty of $1 million in fines and up to 30 years in federal prison. You committed a coordinated string of federal crimes to build your coastal fortress." Patricia's face twisted into a mask of furious denial. She looked at her son, waiting for him to shut down these accusations, but Bradley was completely paralyzed. His imposing executive facade had been entirely stripped away. I had sat in complete, terrifying silence. The shark lawyer forced a harsh, dismissive laugh. "This is an entertaining performance, counsel," he sneered. "You are throwing accusations without a single shred of authenticated proof. This is a bluff. It is pure hearsay designed to frighten my client. You have absolutely no evidence to back up these ridiculous allegations." I rotated the sleek silver laptop 90 degrees, pushing it smoothly across the frosted glass table until the high-resolution screen faced Bradley and his attorney. The shark lawyer had stopped laughing the exact second the spreadsheet illuminated the room. I did not present a simple bank statement or a generic financial summary. I presented a fully interactive, deeply comprehensive forensic accounting map that my investigative team had spent the last 72 hours meticulously assembling. The screen displayed a complex web of red and black transaction lines, all converging on a single point of total financial ruin. "You demanded authenticated proof," I stated, my voice devoid of any emotion, cutting through the hum of the air conditioning. "Here it is. Every single keystroke, every digital transfer, and every hidden routing number you utilized over the past 14 months is documented, time-stamped, and verified by an independent forensic auditor." I reached out and tapped the spacebar, expanding the first nested folder on the screen. Let us examine the Marcus escrow account first. On October 12th, at precisely 2:14 in the afternoon, you initiated a wire transfer of $50,000. You routed that money through a dummy corporation registered in Delaware under the maiden name of your mother. Patricia flinched visibly, her rigid, arrogant posture crumbling instantly as her own direct complicity flashed across the lit screen. She opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to launch another venomous threat, but her throat seemed to have completely closed in sudden sheer panic. She stared in horror at the undeniable digital trail linking her directly to the escalating federal crimes, her face turning a sickly pale white. 3 days later, I continued, my tone relentless and clinical. "You siphoned another $75,000 from the Chen Family Trust. These were your brokerage clients, Bradley. People who trusted you to manage their real estate acquisitions. You systematically bled their escrow accounts dry." I scrolled down the screen, highlighting a cascading series of red transactions. "You did not just borrow this money to secure the coastal property. You embezzled these funds to finance your fabricated lifestyle. Look at November 3rd. $12,000 routed to a luxury car dealership to cover the lease on your sports car. Look at December 15th. $18,000 wired to a private jeweler for a diamond bracelet you purchased for a woman who is not your wife." Bradley lost all his color, his face draining to a sickly gray. His confident executive posture was completely annihilated. He stared at the screen, his chest heaving as he struggled to draw air into his lungs. He looked like a man watching his own execution in real time. "This is fabricated," he stammered, his voice barely a weak, trembling whisper. "You hacked my computer. You manipulated this data. This is completely illegal. You cannot use this." Kendra leaned forward, resting her forearms on the glass table, her presence dominating the space. "We did not hack anything, Bradley," she clarified, her voice sharp and lethal. "The Lilly Medical Trust, which you so graciously established with my sister-in-law as the sole executor, required a mandatory financial audit to satisfy federal compliance regulations. During that standard legally mandated audit, the fiduciary officers detected severe irregularities in the originating funding sources. By intertwining stolen client funds with a protected medical trust, you inadvertently gave the auditors complete legal authorization to trace every dollar back to its origin. You handed us the keys to your prison cell." The shark attorney had not spoken a single word since I turned the laptop around. He pulled reading glasses from his breast pocket and leaned close to the glowing screen. His eyes darted rapidly across the dense forensic map, expertly tracing the routing numbers, verifying the exact timestamps, and reading the embedded certified auditor notes. I watched the arrogant, overconfident swagger completely melt off his body, rapidly replaced by a cold, deeply calculating sense of professional self-preservation. He was an aggressive divorce lawyer, a man who thrived on bullying, terrified spouses, and hiding offshore assets. He was most certainly not a criminal defense attorney, and he was currently looking at a textbook, absolutely irrefutable case of multi-million-dollar federal wire fraud. "You see, counselor," I said, directing my attention to the man in the pinstripe suit. "My estranged husband did not just forge my signature to buy a house. He actively engaged in a sustained systematic embezzlement ring, defrauding over a dozen of his own brokerage clients, to the tune of nearly $2 million. The coastal property acquisition was just the final desperate maneuver of a man running a localized Ponzi scheme. These documents are already compiled into a formal evidentiary packet. They will be submitted to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation by Friday." The room descended into a heavy, suffocating silence. The ticking of the wall clock sounded like hammer strikes against the glass table. Bradley looked at his lawyer, his eyes wide with desperate pleading panic. "Do something," Bradley choked out. "Claim privilege. Shut this down right now." The shark attorney did not look at his client. He took off his reading glasses, folding them with precision. His face had gone pale blood, rushing from his silver beard. He reached out, closed my laptop screen, and gently pushed the device back toward me. He stood up smoothly, adjusting his suit jacket. He opened his leather briefcase and began sweeping his legal pads, pens, and unread files into the dark interior. He snapped the latches shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. "I cannot represent a client actively engaged in federal wire fraud," the attorney stated, his voice stripped of all its former arrogance, leaving only a hollow, urgent need to escape. "I am formally withdrawing as your legal counsel effective immediately. Do not contact me." He turned on his heel and walked from the room without looking back. The heavy wooden door clicked shut with a deafening finality, sealing Bradley and Patricia inside the sterile mediation room. The abrupt departure of the shark attorney sucked the remaining oxygen from the space. The imposing legal shield Bradley had purchased with stolen money had just vaporized before his eyes. He stared at the empty chair where his counsel had been sitting seconds ago, his mind completely unable to process the magnitude of his sudden vulnerability. Beside him, Patricia began to physically unravel. Her perfectly manicured hands flew to her throat as her breathing turned rapid and shallow. The realization that the threats of federal prison were not a bluff, but a documented reality hit her like a physical blow. She gasped for air, her chest heaving in erratic, panicked rhythms. The haughty arrogance that had radiated from her pores just minutes prior was entirely gone, replaced by the raw, suffocating terror of a woman watching her legacy disintegrate into ashes. Survival instinct finally overpowered Bradley's paralysis. His eyes darted wildly around the room, hunting for an escape route that did not exist. Realizing the legal avenue was completely closed, his mind immediately pivoted to the only other language he understood: money. If he was going down for federal wire fraud, he needed capital to run. He jammed his trembling hand into the inside pocket of his tailored suit jacket and yanked out his smartphone. His fingers slipped and fumbled against the glass screen, slick with a sudden sheen of cold sweat. I watched him input a complex sequence of passcodes, his eyes wide and unblinking. He was bypassing his domestic banking apps, navigating directly to the encrypted portal for the offshore accounts he had meticulously hidden in the Cayman Islands. These were the ghost accounts, the untraceable digital vaults, where he had been quietly funneling the embezzled escrow funds for the past 14 months. He just needed to initiate a mass wire transfer to an untouchable crypto wallet, grab his passport, and get on a plane before the federal authorities could secure a warrant. He tapped the screen with frantic, heavy strikes, his breathing ragged. The encrypted application loading screen illuminated his pale, terrified face. Then the phone violently vibrated in his palm. It did not display the familiar blue interface of his offshore portfolio. Instead, a massive, solid red banner consumed the entire screen. The digital alert flashed with a brilliant, unforgiving light. Bradley stared at the bold white text, his jaw dropping open in absolute, unadulterated horror. The application explicitly stated that all associated assets had been temporarily seized under federal jurisdiction. Below the flashing red warning, the financial summary loaded. The screen displayed a perfectly uniform column of zeros. The Cayman accounts were completely empty. The domestic checking accounts were empty. The emergency credit lines were frozen solid. Every single hidden dollar, every stolen cent he had hoarded to finance his lavish lifestyle and his eventual escape had been thoroughly and systematically eradicated. I allowed the silence to stretch, letting the absolute finality of the red screen sink deep into his bones. Kendra sat beside me, her posture perfectly relaxed, watching the total annihilation of the man sitting across the table. I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands on the cool, frosted glass. "You forgot a very important detail about my background, Bradley," I stated softly. My voice was perfectly calm, contrasting sharply with the chaotic panic radiating from his side of the room. "When we first met, I was completing my final licensing exams. You always viewed my career as a minor, insignificant hobby compared to your grand real estate ambitions. You assumed my job consisted of balancing simple spreadsheets. You failed to remember that I am a fully licensed, certified forensic accountant." Bradley slowly raised his eyes from the blank screen, staring at me with a sickening mix of dread and dawning comprehension. "As a certified financial professional, I am bound by strict federal reporting guidelines." I continued enunciating every single syllable with clinical precision. "When I discovered the massive irregularities in the trust funding, I did not just print a few documents to threaten you in a mediation room. I was legally obligated to report the discovery of a multi-million-dollar escrow fraud ring directly to the Internal Revenue Service and the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. I handed over the entire encrypted hard drive containing your digital footprints 48 hours ago. They did not need to wait for a judge to issue a standard subpoena. Because you utilized federal banking wires to transfer stolen capital across state lines, the authorities initiated a comprehensive immediate asset freeze at exactly 8 o'clock this morning." Patricia stopped hyperventilating. The sound of her ragged breathing abruptly ceased, replaced by a terrifying absolute stillness. She slowly turned her head to look at her son. The color drained entirely from her face, leaving her skin looking like cracked parchment. She had linked her own retirement portfolios, her investment accounts, and her personal lines of credit to Bradley's holding company to artificially inflate his asset valuation for the coastal property acquisition. She had intertwined her entire financial existence with his fraudulent shell corporation to help him secure the massive mortgage. The realization hit her with the force of a freight train. The federal asset freeze did not just target Bradley's stolen funds. It targeted every single account associated with the fraudulent entity. "My money!" Patricia choked out, her voice a fragile, raspy wheeze. "Bradley, my money was in that holding account. All of my liquid assets were tethered to that corporate profile." Bradley could not look at his mother. He stared blankly at the frosted glass table, his phone slipping from his numb fingers and clattering loudly against the hard surface. The complete absence of an answer was all the confirmation Patricia needed. Her eyes widened, the pupils dilating with pure, unhinged fury. She lunged across the table, screaming and violently hitting him for ruining her financial life permanently. 72 hours later, the mahogany doors of the executive boardroom at Thornton and Hayes Brokerage clicked shut. The heavy oak table was surrounded by the firm's 12 senior partners. Bradley stood at the head of the room. He looked entirely different from the arrogant executive I had married. His tailored suit hung loosely on his frame. Dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes. He gripped the edges of the podium, knuckles white sweating under the recessed lighting. "Gentlemen," Bradley began, his voice lacking its usual commanding resonance, "I called this emergency meeting to address the baseless rumors circulating regarding the firm's escrow accounts. We are currently facing a minor administrative misunderstanding with the Internal Revenue Service. It is a temporary compliance glitch caused by an outdated routing software protocol. I have already dispatched our legal team to resolve the freeze. Operations will resume normally by Monday. You have my absolute word." He scanned the faces of his partners, desperate for a nod of agreement. He received only stony silence. The doors at the back of the boardroom swung open. Every head turned. Thomas walked in. He did not shuffle. He did not lean heavily on a cane. The frail, oblivious demeanor my father-in-law had maintained for the past 2 years had completely vanished. He moved with a sharp, terrifying authority, flanked by Kendra and me. Bradley's jaw dropped. "Dad, what are you doing here? This is a closed shareholder meeting. I am fully aware of what kind of meeting this is," Bradley Thomas stated, his voice booming across the polished wood. "I am still the majority stakeholder of this firm. A firm I built from the ground up with integrity, which you have systematically attempted to destroy." Thomas walked directly to the center of the room. He did not look at his son with pity. He looked at him with profound, unyielding disgust. "You assumed I was too old and too weak to notice the discrepancies," Thomas continued, turning to face the bewildered board members. "You assumed I was blinded by paternal loyalty. You were wrong. When I first suspected you were manipulating client funds, I knew I needed absolute, undeniable proof. I knew I needed someone with the forensic expertise to track your offshore movements without triggering your internal alarms. So I went to the smartest financial mind I know." Thomas gestured to me. I stepped forward and placed a massive leather-bound dossier onto the center of the table. "Olivia and I have been quietly collaborating for 6 months." Thomas declared, the revelation hitting Bradley like a physical strike. "While you thought you were outsmarting your wife and defrauding my clients, we were compiling every piece of evidence required to surgically remove you from this company and family." Bradley stumbled backward, hitting the whiteboard. "Dad, you cannot do this. Patricia will never let you. Do not mention your mother to me." Thomas snapped, his eyes flashing with raw fury. "Your mother is currently trying to liquidate her jewelry to hire a criminal defense attorney because her assets are frozen by the government. She made her choice when she helped you steal from a medical trust intended for my granddaughter. Now both of you will face the absolute consequences." Kendra stepped forward flawlessly, taking command of the room. "Gentlemen," she said, addressing the board, "the dossier before you contains certified forensic audits proving Bradley Thornton embezzled nearly $2 million from your collective client escrow accounts. It details wire fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. Federal authorities are already in possession of these exact documents. If you attempt to protect him, you will be named as co-conspirators in a federal indictment." The senior partners scrambled to open the dossier. Pages flipped rapidly. Gasps and curses filled the air as the executives recognized the names of their defrauded clients. The evidence was irrefutable. "I motion for an immediate vote," the managing partner stated, standing up and glaring at Bradley. "I vote to strip Bradley Thornton of all executive privileges, revoke his equity shares entirely, and terminate his employment with cause-effective right this exact second." Seconded, another partner shot back instantly. Agreements echoed around the table. The vote was unanimous. In less than 60 seconds, Bradley's entire professional life was completely obliterated. He had no job, no equity, and no future in the financial sector. Bradley sank into the chair behind him, burying his face in his hands. He looked up at me, a pathetic, broken shell of a man. You took everything, he whimpered. The company, the money, the Malibu house. Actually, I did not just take the Malibu house, Bradley, I replied, my voice projecting a calm, icy finality. I sold it. He stared at me uncomprehending. You cannot sell it. It is tied up in the trust. The trust that I legally control as the sole executor, I corrected him smoothly. Once the federal freeze locked your accounts, I filed an emergency petition with a federal judge. Because you used stolen funds to secure the mortgage, the property was subject to immediate liquidation to provide restitution to the victims. I bypassed the standard market. I sold the coastal property directly to a boutique hotel group yesterday afternoon in a private all-cash transaction for $3 million. Bradley gasped, clutching his chest as if he had been physically shot. The fortress he had built with lies and stolen money was completely gone. The funds have been fully legally cleared, I stated, staring down at the man who had tried to ruin me. After reimbursing the defrauded escrow clients, the remaining balance was routed directly into a fortified, impenetrable, ironclad account. The funds have secured Lily's medical care for life. A faint wailing sound pierced the heavy silence of the boardroom. The noise grew steadily louder, echoing off the high-rise glass windows. The wailing multiplied, transitioning into the unmistakable piercing shriek of approaching police sirens. They were converging rapidly on the building. The sirens cut off, replaced by the thud of tactical boots marching across the marble floor of the reception area. Bradley scrambled backward, his chair tipping over and crashing against the panoramic window. He pressed against the glass, his breath fogging the surface as the heavy mahogany doors burst open. 4 agents strode inside, their dark windbreakers bearing the gold lettering of the FBI. The lead agent bypassed the executives, walking directly toward Bradley. Her words carried the weight of a finalized execution. Bradley Thornton, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, identity theft, and corporate embezzlement. Bradley raised his hands, his voice cracking into a shrill, pathetic squeak. He pleaded with the agent, claiming a misunderstanding, begging his father to explain. Thomas remained perfectly still, refusing to acknowledge the man being cornered against the window. The agents grabbed Bradley, spinning him around and slamming his wrists together. The click of the handcuffs echoed through the silent boardroom. It was a clinical sound that finalized his total destruction. The senior partners watched in disgust as their former peer was marched past the table, stripped of his power and freedom. Kendra stepped aside, offering the agents a clear path to the exit. She exchanged a professional nod with the lead agent, acknowledging a flawlessly executed strike. I remained seated, watching the man who had tried to ruin my life being paraded out. There was no sadness, no lingering anger, just a profound sense of absolute closure. We followed the procession out of the boardroom and down the main corridor toward the glass lobby. Patricia was pacing near the reception desk, clutching her handbag, demanding updates from the receptionist. When she saw the agents marching her son toward the exit in handcuffs, her face contorted in horror. She rushed forward, screaming at the officers to release him, threatening lawsuits, and screaming about her social standing. A second team of agents stepped out from an alcove, intercepting her path. The agent in charge stepped squarely into her line of sight. Patricia Thornton, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and identity theft. Patricia froze, the color draining from her face. She looked at the handcuffs and began thrashing wildly, her bag flying across the marble floor, its contents spilling everywhere. She shrieked, kicking and fighting as 2 agents restrained her arms, forcing her wrists behind her back. As the metal cuffs snapped shut, her eyes darted frantically around the lobby until they locked onto Thomas. He was standing beside me, his posture firm and unyielding. "Thomas, do something!" She shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the glass walls. "Tell them who I am. You cannot let them do this to me. Tell them to stop right now." Thomas looked at the woman he had been married to for nearly 4 decades. He looked at the woman who had happily conspired to steal a medical trust fund from a dying child just to finance a mansion. He did not say a single word. He simply turned his back on her, offering his arm to me instead. We walked away together, ignoring her increasingly desperate screams as the agents dragged her out through the sliding glass doors and into the waiting transport vehicles. 6 months later, the suffocating tension of that corporate boardroom felt like a distant, fated nightmare. The afternoon sun filtered through the sprawling canopy of a massive oak tree, casting warm light across the lush green grass of my backyard. I sat comfortably on the wooden deck, leaning back in a cushioned wicker chair, sipping a glass of chilled iced tea. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, bringing with it the sweet scent of blooming jasmine. Across the lawn, Lily dashed after a bright yellow butterfly. She moved with effortless bounding energy, her laughter ringing out clear and strong. Her cheeks were flushed with healthy color, and the dark circles that used to shadow her eyes were completely gone. Her heart was functioning perfectly, beating with the steady, reliable rhythm of a child who had her entire life stretching out before her. There were no more midnight rushes to the emergency room, no more terrifying monitor alarms, and no more suffocating dread about how I would afford the treatments she desperately needed. The wooden gate at the side of the house swung open with a cheerful creak. Kendra and Jason walked through carrying large canvas grocery bags, overflowing with fresh produce, premium steaks, and charcoal. Jason, Bradley's younger brother, had completely severed ties with his mother and brother the moment the fraud was exposed. He had stood by my side throughout the grueling federal hearings, offering unyielding support to Lily and me. He set the bags down on the patio table and immediately jogged into the yard, scooping Lily up into the air and spinning her around until they both collapsed onto the grass in a fit of breathless giggles. Kendra walked up the deck stairs, dropping a bag of briquettes by the grill. She gave me a warm, genuine smile, taking a seat in the chair next to mine. My phone chimed softly from the tabletop. I picked it up, glancing at the illuminated screen. It was an automated notification from the bank confirming that Lily's trust fund had just generated another quarterly dividend. The medical account was replenished, legally protected, and entirely untouchable. I smiled, pressing the power button to darken the screen, and slipped the phone back into my pocket. I did not need to check the balance ever again. I looked out at the yard, watching Jason and Lily attempting to build a crooked tower out of fallen branches. Kendra opened a bottle of sparkling water, handing me a glass as we sat back to enjoy the warm afternoon air. There were no long monologues, no dramatic speeches, and no remaining shadows from the past. There was only the quiet, absolute victory of a life well lived, surrounded by the people who truly mattered.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside. calling softly through my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, child, you're stronger than you know. I am my Father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. One day the snow will cover footprints, one day the fire will burn low, but the things a father gives his daughter are the things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that he won, but the quiet way he loved her and the woman she becomes. I am my Father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss,